guy running with Latin. The guy run, my friend, but they're gonna catch him. You see that, my friend? They're gonna go get him. They're gonna go get him, my friend. Look.
What's up, fam? It's your boy Demuir here, purveyor of all sounds underground. Thank you for joining me on this YouTube Tuesday, where today we'll be talking about contracts, and I'm going to share the things that I've learned and that I believe are essential to have in your arsenal when you reach that level of signing tracks to labels. But before we get into that, what I need from you is a little bit of SLC, which is to subscribe, hit like, and the comment and notification buttons. So contracts, the things that I've learned with contracts, and I'm going to start this talk off with a very famous Chinese proverb, which is the faintest ink is just as powerful as the strongest memory. And that is a key thing that's always stuck with me. Like, the faintest ink, what the fuck does that mean? And it's actually true. You can pull up a document depending on the terms of the contract several years later, and if it's legible and someone could read it, it still has impact. And if it's fully executed, you are still bounded to that agreement. So here are the key things I've learned, and that will save you from situations like where we have with Ice Cube banging up offices just to get his due as per the agreed contract. So point number one, it's very, very, very extremely important, even if you don't think you have the balls and time to read through a contract, is to fucking read it and read it in its entirety and write down any questions you have. And don't be worried about looking stupid or being completely wrong about how you interpreted something. At least you read the damn thing. A lot of us today, because we're so busy and wanting to get things done and so focused on the end game, which is, if I sign to this label, I'm going to be put up on all of these events, which is not entirely true, but that's for another video. But people always just focus on the end game, which is just to get the release out, not understanding the complications involved in a particular contract that you may be setting yourself up for. So it's very important to read it and ask lots of questions. It doesn't mean you're being difficult. It just means that you're seeking to understand. Point number two, always, always, always ask for a release clause. And what a release clause is, it basically is an understanding with the label that if they do not release your track within a certain amount of time, and for me it's usually about 6 months to a year of the signed agreement, that all of the masters and associated publishing, which hopefully you haven't signed away, come back to you, and you then have the right to market that track and release it elsewhere. This is extremely important because I've seen a lot of people sit on tracks and only to not have them be released. And it's completely ridiculous when you think about it. All of the effort that goes into buying equipment, mixing the tracks, getting them mastered, and getting other DJs to play them out just for promotional purposes, only to have that label sit on its ass and not release the track. It doesn't matter if they got all kinds of different reasons. The point is what is the impact to you as the artist in not having it released? And if you're an artist like me, where you're constantly making music and you always want to be on top of the fresh stuff, you just kind of cringe when something you did 5 years ago comes out, unless it's timeless and people can absorb it and understand it. But make sure you go after the release clause, because it will give you a peace of mind at the end of the day. What a release clause actually is your agreement with the label that if they do not release your track within a certain amount of time, that all of the masters and publishing tied to the track or tracks come back to you as the artist, which you're then free to go out and then promote or sign to another label. Third, and not least but last, is to ensure that you maintain the masters and publishing of your project or track or set of tracks, EP or whatever. This is extremely important because we're living in an age of content, and I always endeavor to make sure that I actually own my fucking master. You can certainly license to a label the ability to distribute your tracks on an exclusive basis, call it 5, 7, 10 years, but anything above 10 years kind of feels antiquated to me. And I'll tell you why. Way back in the day in the music business, when, we're talking like between, the 30s and the 70s, and I'll go as far as the 1990s as well, labels spent an exuberant amount of money to be able to not only record the project, but to also promote it. We're talking into the millions of dollars sometimes. And even with our music for underground electronic music, we're talking about thousands of dollars in terms of producing vinyl, getting the records into the right DJ's hands, smoozing people, making sure it gets on the radio, etc. So a lot of labels took the position that we have to recoup all of this money back. And that was fine for that day where that type of money was being spent. But those contracts, in my opinion, are severely antiquated. So if you receive a contract that is 60 to 70 pages long and it talks about all of this money that the label is expecting to recoup, you know that that's not the right contract for you and potentially not the right label for you unless some substantial changes are made. Because there aren't really any labels today in the underground electronic music scene that I know of that are cutting massive advance checks for over hundreds of thousands of dollars to allow you to complete a few EPs. Rather, today, because of technology and how it is, and it's much more simplistic and easier to put a record out, anyone and their dog could go out and buy a laptop, buy a DAW, a few plugins, and immediately have a song ready for distribution. So you think about that. That's cut out all of the cost of yesteryear, where back in the 60s and 70s and 90s even, when it costed a ton of money to just record products or tracks in a studio. And we just don't have that problem anymore. So why do the same antiquated contracts apply today? Rather, you should aim for contracts that are very straightforward, easy to read, and read like licensing agreements, which is what I typically prefer, where it's the label asking you for the right to distribute and promote your track, but I still own the master and publishing attached to it, because after that term, I want to have the explicit ability to be able to distribute my track anywhere and let it be played in movies and films, etc., which is where I think this industry is going, but that's for another video. As well, check out the link in our description section where you'll be forwarded to merchandise for the Purveyor Underground label. A lot of you guys have been asking about that, and it's readily available, but we thought, why not just add a direct link to that? So check it out. Thank you once again. Peace.